Imagine your community debating whether children should attend the dominant culture's schools, adopt its language, change their names to fit in. Some call it survival, others call it betrayal. And this isn't a modern immigration debate. It's Jerusalem, 175 BCE, and it's about to tear a nation apart. You've heard this story as Greeks forcing paganism on faithful Jews. But the people pushing hardest to turn Jerusalem Greek were Jews themselves. The Hellenization crisis wasn't foreign religious persecution. It was a bitter internal civil conflict about cultural assimilation. Two Jewish factions fighting over a question every minority community faces. How much should we adopt from the dominant culture to survive, and when does adaptation become erasure? First, the world they lived in. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, God made manifest, ruled the Seleucid Empire. He wasn't uniquely villainous. He was a typical Hellenistic king managing a vast multicultural territory. Greek was the global language of power. Think of what English means for international business today. Speak Greek, you could trade anywhere, write contracts, access courts, build political alliances. The Seleucids controlled Judea, but Rome was emerging as the regional referee. Antiochus needed stable, productive provinces. He didn't care what God's people worshipped, as long as they paid taxes and kept order. The pressure to Hellenize wasn't military conquest, it was economic and political gravity. The Jewish debate wasn't Greek versus Jewish. It was a spectrum. On one end, full preservation, Hebrew names, traditional education, Torah observance only. On the other, full assimilation, Greek names, gymnasium education, syncretistic worship. Most people fell somewhere in between. Greek language for business, but Jewish practice at home. Greek education plus Sabbath observance. Here's what's crucial. The majority of priests and nobility supported Hellenization. These weren't outsiders or traitors. They were the establishment, the educated elite who saw Greek culture as the path to prosperity and influence. The conservatives weren't the mainstream. They were the resistance. The question was never Greek or Jewish. It was how much Greek is too much. Now the gymnasium, this wasn't a fitness center. It was a citizenship factory. The alphabet, Greek educational training for young men ages 18 to 22, was the gateway to citizenship. Complete the alphabet, you become a citizen. Skip it, you're politically excluded. Jason, a Jewish priest, built a gymnasium in Jerusalem in 175 BCE. He's not importing Greek culture for fun. He's creating a pipeline, control who gets educated, control who gets citizenship, control who holds power. Conservative Jewish families face an impossible choice. Send your sons to the gymnasium, where they'll exercise naked, learn Greek philosophy, maybe worship Greek gods, or watch them become permanent political outsiders. The high priest was the highest Jewish authority. No king, no governor, just the high priest. But Antiochus appointed the high priest, foreign power controlling internal leadership. Jason outbids the previous high priest for the position. He pays Antiochus a massive bribe, builds the gymnasium, and renames Jerusalem Antioch of Jerusalem. He's rebranding the holy city as a Greek polis. Then Menelaus outbids Jason. He steals gold from the temple treasury to pay his bribe. Riots erupt. Here's the detail that changes everything. Both Jason and Menelaus are Greek names. Both candidates had already Hellenized. The fight wasn't Greeks versus Jews. It was Hellenized Jews versus each other. The traditional narrative, Greeks banned circumcision, burned Torah scrolls, sacrificed pigs in the temple, renamed it for Zeus. All true. But who was behind these laws? Menelaus and his radical reforming party, Jews, not Greeks. Antiochus provided military backing. He stationed troops in Jerusalem. But the ideological drive came from within the Jewish community. The Seleucid king was enforcing policies that Jewish reformers had requested. This wasn't religious persecution from outside. It was one Jewish faction using foreign power to crush another Jewish faction. Like, why would Jews rename their temple for Zeus? Syncretism, the blending of religious beliefs by equating deities across traditions. The reformers may have reasoned like this: Zeus, Olympus, the supreme Greek god; Baal Shamin, the supreme Syrian god; Yahweh, the supreme Jewish god. Different names for the same cosmic deity. From their perspective, they weren't abandoning Yahweh, they were translating him into a language the Greek world understood. Modernizing Judaism for a global age, they may have genuinely believed they were saving their religion, not destroying it. The conservatives saw blasphemy, the reformers saw adaptation. Both sides thought they were preserving Judaism. That's the tragedy. This pattern repeats throughout history. Internal debates about assimilation get framed as external persecution. The Maccabees won. They wrote the history. We inherited their framing. Faithful Jews resisting Greek oppression. But the sources come from one side of a civil war. The Hellenizing Jews didn't leave their own accounts. We don't have their arguments in their own words. When reading ancient sources, ask, who wrote this? Which side were they on? What would the losers have said? The villains of this story, Jason, Menelaus, the reforming priests, probably saw themselves as pragmatic modernizers. The Maccabees called them traitors. History recorded the Maccabean verdict. Return to the opening question. Every minority community faces this debate. How much of the dominant culture do you adopt? When does adaptation become survival, and when does it become erasure? Who decides? There are no easy answers. Full preservation can mean political exclusion and economic marginalization. Full assimilation can mean losing the traditions that define you. The Hellenization crisis shows what happens when a community can't find compromise, when the spectrum collapses into two warring camps, when internal debate becomes civil war. The gymnasium question never went away. Every generation asks, which schools, which language, which names, which practices do we keep, which do we adapt, which do we abandon? The Hellenizers weren't monsters. They were parents trying to give their children opportunities, leaders trying to secure their community's future in a Greek-dominated world. The conservatives weren't fanatics. They were guardians of tradition who saw assimilation as slow-motion extinction. Both had legitimate concerns. Both made choices with consequences they couldn't fully predict. The Maccabean revolt gave one answer, but the question itself remained open. The question, how much should we assimilate, has never been answered. It's being debated right now in communities around the world. Right? What the Hellenization crisis teaches us. This isn't a question with a correct answer. It's a tension to be managed, not a problem to be solved. The reformers weren't wrong to see opportunity in Greek culture. The conservatives weren't wrong to see danger. Both were responding to real pressures with real stakes. The tragedy wasn't that one side was evil. The tragedy was that a community couldn't hold together across its differences. Yet, 2,000 years later, we're still asking the same questions, still finding no easy answers, still living with the consequences of how we choose.